Evelyn Hart had been living alone for 2 years in a small apartment on the outskirts of Portland. It was simple, quiet, and perfectly predictable. 3 things she thought she wanted until she realized how easily peace could turn into loneliness. Days bled into one another, measured in finished assignments and deadlines for clients she'd never meet. At night, the hum of the city through her half-open window was her only company, the soft rhythm of cars and distant trains lulling her to sleep. Then one rain-drenched evening, as she worked at her desk, the silence cracked. At first, she thought the voice drifting through the wall was television noise or someone on a phone call, but the tone changed, words repeating, emotion deepening. The man next door was rehearsing, his voice rising and breaking, trying lines again and again, each repetition filled with quiet intensity. Evelyn froze. The wall separating them was thin. Every sound came through like a secret. His tone was low, deliberate, sometimes raw, sometimes tender. It wasn't background noise. It was confession. She could hear the ache in his words as clearly as if he'd spoken them to her. Night after night, she found herself listening. His voice traced shapes in the silence, filling her apartment with an energy that had been missing. She told herself she wasn't eavesdropping, that it wasn't her fault if his words slipped through her wall. But every evening she caught herself waiting for him, fingers pausing mid-sentence when she heard his voice start again. Some nights he laughed. Sometimes he fell silent mid-sentence like someone remembering something painful. Other nights his words cracked with grief. One evening she heard him murmur, "Do you believe people can come back after they're gone?" Evelyn stilled. That wasn't a line. That was a wound. The air in her little apartment felt heavier as she sat perfectly still, listening to pain travel through plaster like prayer. She didn't even know his name, but his sorrow felt intimately familiar. She knew what it was to lose someone, to speak into silence hoping it might answer back. The weeks that followed fell into an odd routine, an unseen connection between 2 lonely apartments. She didn't know who he was or what haunted him, but she began to imagine pieces of him. Maybe an actor, maybe a man piecing himself together. She pictured his face from the way his voice bent around certain words: deep kindness, quiet regret, charm buried beneath fatigue. On a still night when even the rain had stopped, she heard him whisper, crack-voiced and real, "I miss you." Anna, the 3 words landed hard. She didn't know Anna, but she didn't need to. Pain like that was universal. She lay awake for hours afterward, staring into the dim light filtering through her curtains, feeling the weight of shared loneliness. He was a stranger she had never seen, but in the dark, his hurt had become part of hers. She thought about giving the wall a soft knock. Just one. An acknowledgement that she'd heard him, that someone else was awake too. But she didn't. It wasn't her place, yet deep down, it didn't feel wrong. It felt human. Days passed and still she listened. It was her secret now, the anonymous voice beside her that filled her solitude with something unexplainably alive. There was a rhythm to it. He would speak, she would listen, and in the strange quiet between them, something gentle began to take root. One Sunday evening, as she sat editing a draft she couldn't finish, his tone changed again. Softer, slower, like a confession whispered into the dark. "When love leaves," he said, "it doesn't take everything. It leaves a sound, a scent, a memory." Evelyn's hands fell still on the keyboard. That voice held more truth than rehearsed lines ever could. She began to wonder what he looked like. Did he smile easily or rarely? Were his eyes tired? Was he the quiet one in every group, or the man trying to hide sadness behind jokes? She imagined him too often, laughed at herself for it, but still. She waited each night, pretending she didn't. Then one evening, as she reached for the kettle, his voice cracked through differently, unsteady, not controlled. Trembling. "I thought time would make it easier," he said, voice breaking. "But I still wake up expecting you to be here." Then silence. The kettle hissed in the background, steam curling into the air. Evelyn didn't move for a long time. She wanted to answer, to speak, to remind him that someone heard him, but of course she couldn't. So she whispered softly against the wall, "You're not alone." He didn't hear, but she said it anyway. For him, for herself. That night, the distance between their walls felt smaller than ever. Something more thread than barrier. Days slipped by in fragments of quiet. The scrape of a chair, faint humming, footsteps. Sometimes nothing at all, and even the nothing started to mean something. Then one morning, sunlight poured into her apartment, thin and gold, breaking through the usual gray. Amid her quiet routine came a sound that didn't belong. A knock. 3 soft raps, not from the wall, but from her door. She froze, pulse speeding. Nobody visited her this early, setting her mug down. She crossed the floor, and when she opened the door, he was standing there. He was taller than she had imagined, his dark hair slightly tousled, eyes the color of something old and kind and tired all at once. He held an envelope in his hand. "Hey," he said, voice familiar now in a way that sent warmth through her chest. "I think your mail ended up in my box again." For a moment, she couldn't form words. The voice that had filled her nights was finally paired with a face, and somehow he looked exactly like how he sounded. Thoughtful. Careful, a little broken. "Thank you," she managed, reaching for the envelope. He offered a small apologetic laugh. "Sorry if you ever hear me talking through the wall, by the way. I'm an actor. I rehearse a lot, sometimes at weird hours." Evelyn smiled. "I don't mind. It's nice, actually. Listening to someone so passionate about what they love." He looked surprised by her answer, then smiled back, something genuine lighting behind his eyes for the first time. "That might be the kindest thing anyone said to me in months." Then, awkwardly, he waved goodbye. "I'm Liam, by the way." When she closed the door, leaning lightly against it, her heart raced. The wall between them suddenly felt thinner, not only in distance, but in meaning. That night, for the first time since she'd heard his voice, there was silence. But it wasn't empty. It was alive with promise, the kind that waits on the edge of possibility. As she lay in bed, moonlight cutting faint lines across the wall, Evelyn realized something quietly profound. Connection didn't always start with sight. Sometimes it started with sound, the proof that someone else was there, breathing, aching, surviving alongside you. The rain began again, steady and soft, and somewhere through that shared rhythm, she knew he was listening too. After that first meeting, Evelyn couldn't stop thinking about Liam. The name alone felt too heavy with meaning now. The voice she'd come to know by heart finally had a face, gentle, handsome in an easy, real way. But his eyes still carried sadness at their edges. For days, she waited, pretending not to. Each night she caught herself listening for his familiar rhythm, but the wall remained quiet. The silence felt bigger now, like something missing. She told herself it didn't matter. He was just her neighbor, a stranger who happened to rehearse, but the logic didn't ease the ache. Then one evening, as she poured coffee, a faint melody drifted through her wall. A piano, music, beautiful, hesitant notes that filled the apartment like light through cracked blinds. And then his voice joined in, low and untrained but tender. He wasn't rehearsing. He was singing. It was a fragile sound, tinged with something bittersweet, a kind of duologue between sorrow and hope. Evelyn leaned her back against the wall, closing her eyes, letting the sound pour into her. When the song ended, the silence that followed was soft and full, like an embrace. The next morning, another knock. Her pulse quickened. She didn't need to guess who it was. When she opened the door, Liam stood there again, smiling sheepishly and holding a small package. "This ended up at my place again," he said. "I think your mail's developing a crush on me." Evelyn laughed gently. "Maybe it just likes crossing thin walls." That made him laugh. A real laugh, less guarded this time. The ice between them seemed to melt with that shared sound. They started talking, longer than before, about how old the building was, about the loud plumbing, about life in small apartments where everyone accidentally learned too much about each other. He told her he'd moved in 6 months earlier, looking for quiet, hoping inspiration would follow. When she asked about his work, he hesitated, then said, I'm an actor. Or at least I was. Haven't done much lately. Evelyn had to bite back a smile. She already knew. I can tell you're passionate about it, she said instead. You don't speak like someone who let it go. He gave her an inquisitive look. You heard me, didn't you? Caught, she hesitated, then admitted. Sometimes. These walls don't exactly believe in privacy. To her relief, he didn't look embarrassed, only amused. I figured, he said with a sheepish grin. You probably think I'm some weirdo talking to himself at midnight. She shook her head quickly. Not weird, just honest. That word seemed to land somewhere deep. His smile faltered into something softer. Thank you, he said. That means more than you think. From then on, they started crossing paths everywhere. By the mailbox, on the stairwell, at the coffee shop around the corner. Each meeting felt unplanned, but fate had a way of rewriting coincidence into pattern, sometimes on the stairs. Their conversations grew warmer, easier. She learned he loved old movies, black coffee, and late-night walks. He learned she was a writer who preferred stories that made people feel something real. But beneath his calm, Evelyn sensed something he didn't say out loud, acidness that never fully left his eyes. One evening, the wall came alive again. She heard his voice, quiet but shaking. He wasn't rehearsing this time. I can't do this without you, Anna, he said. Thought time would fix it, but it didn't. Then came a soft thud, maybe him sitting down. Silence followed. Evelyn Shand moved instinctively to the wall. Her fingers rested on the cool paint as if she could reach through and offer comfort. But she didn't speak. She just stayed there listening, her heart aching for him. Whoever Anna was, she had left a hole in his life that no words could fill. Over the next few days, Liam seemed quieter. His door stayed closed. No music, no voice, just silence. Evelyn wanted to check on him, but didn't know how to without crossing a line. She found herself typing his name in her writing notes, as if his story had slipped into her imagination without asking permission. That weekend, she went to the local bookstore to clear her mind. But when she came back, she found Liam sitting on the building's front steps, his head resting against the railing. He looked up and smiled weakly. Hey, Evelyn, rough day? She asked gently. Just one of those days when you realize you're living more in memories than in the present, he said with a sad smile. She sat beside him, silent for a while. The street lights flickered, and the evening breeze carried the smell of rain. Memories aren't a bad place to visit, she said quietly. As long as you don't start living there. He turned to look at her. You sound like someone who knows what that feels like. Maybe, she said. Writers tend to get stuck in what-ifs. Liam chuckled. Then maybe that's why we're neighbors to people living between stories. Evelyn smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, he didn't look lost. That night, she couldn't focus on anything. Every time she glanced at the wall, she imagined him sitting there on the other side, maybe drinking tea, maybe thinking of Anna. She wondered who Anna was. A girlfriend, a wife, someone he couldn't forget. The thought made her heart twist in a way she didn't understand. The next evening, she read by her lamp. She heard soft footsteps next door. Then his voice, not talking but humming. It wasn't sad this time. It sounded like someone slowly finding their way back to living. Evelyn smiled without realizing it. But then his voice came again, quiet, uncertain. Evelyn! She blinked, startled. He had never said her name through the wall before. Yeah, she said softly, unsure if he could even hear her. I just wanted to say thanks, he said, for talking to me, for being kind. I didn't realize how much I needed someone to talk to until I met you. Her throat tightened. She wanted to say something meaningful, something that could tell him he wasn't alone. But all she managed was, You're welcome, Liam. There was a short pause. Then he said, You know, I think I owe you coffee. Real conversation, not through the wall this time. She smiled, her heart fluttering. I'd like that. For a long moment, silence returned. But it wasn't the same as before. It was calm, hopeful, full of unspoken words, waiting for their turn. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his voice in her head. Not the rehearsed lines or the sad whispers, but the way he'd said her name like it meant something. She didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in years, she was curious. The thin wall that once kept them apart had become something else. A bridge. And as she drifted off to sleep, she realized something quietly beautiful. Sometimes the people meant to change our lives don't knock loudly. Sometimes they're just a voice through the wall until one day they're standing right beside you. Days passed after that night when Liam had asked her for coffee through the wall, but he didn't come by. Evelyn tried not to overthink it. Maybe he was busy, or maybe he had changed his mind. Still, every sound from the apartment next door made her heart jump. Footsteps, drawers opening, the soft hum of music. His presence had become a quiet rhythm in her life, and she didn't realize how much it mattered until it wasn't there. One rainy afternoon, while Evelyn was editing an article, someone knocked on her door again. She opened it, and there he was, Liam, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing that slightly awkward but sincere smile she'd grown to recognize. "I finally made good on my promise," he said, lifting the cup toward her. "Didn't want you thinking I'd forgotten." Evelyn smiled and stepped aside. "Come in before the rain ruins your apology." He laughed softly and walked in. It was the first time he'd been in her apartment, and his eyes scanned the room curiously. It was small, but warm books everywhere, candles on the windowsill, a half-finished manuscript open on her laptop. "Looks like a writer's cave," he said, handing her a cup. "Guilty," she replied. "And you actors' cave next door?" He gave a quiet nod. "Used to be. I haven't really worked in a while." They sat on the couch sipping coffee as the rain tapped against the windows. For a while, they just talked about ordinary things. Movies, favorite books, the best place to get coffee in Portland. But then, without warning, the conversation turned deeper. Liam set his cup down and leaned back. "You probably heard me before talking to someone named Anna." Evelyn hesitated, unsure what to say, but hesmealed faintly as if saving her from pretending. "It's okay. These walls don't keep secrets very well." She nodded quietly. "I did. I wasn't trying to listen, but I know." He interrupted gently. "It's fine. Maybe I needed someone to hear me, even if it wasn't on purpose." He paused for a long time, then said, "Anna was my fiancée. We were supposed to get married 2 years ago. She got sick. It happened fast." Evelyn's chest tightened. His voice stayed calm. But there was something fragile behind it. Something that carried both love and loss. "I thought if I kept working, kept acting, it would help me move on," he continued. "But every line I read started sounding like something I should have said to her. I stopped taking roles. I couldn't fake emotions that were too close to real." Evelyn didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. She just listened the way she always had. Only now he could see it. After a moment, he smiled weakly. "You know, it's strange. Talking to you feels easier than talking to most people I know. Maybe because you've already heard me at my worst." She smiled softly. "Maybe it's because I didn't try to fix anything." He looked at her surprised, then nodded. "Yeah, everyone wants to fix you. No one just listens." The rain outside grew heavier, and Thesmall room filled with the quiet sound of it. Evelyn felt something shift, not just between them, but inside her. She'd spent so long living behind her own invisible walls, keeping people out, writing stories about emotions. She rarely allowed herself to feel. But with Liam, it was different. He wasn't perfect or strong all the time. He was real. After that day, things changed subtly but meaningfully. They didn't have to knock anymore. Sometimes they would just talk through the wall again like before. Only now they both knew who was listening. "Are you writing tonight?" He would ask, trying. She'd reply, "But my characters are being difficult." Then give him a good line. He'd tease something honest. And sometimes she would hear him rehearsing again, his voice carrying through the wall, steady and full of feeling. Only now it wasn't just pain she heard. It was strength. He was coming back to himself one line at a time. One night, Evelyn sat in bed with her lamp on and heard him speaking softly. It wasn't a script this time. "You know," he said through the wall, "I used to think grief meant holding on. But maybe it's learning how to let go without forgetting." She smiled sadly and replied, "I think you're right." There was silence, then a faint laugh. "So, I'm not just talking to myself tonight." "No," she said, smiling. "You've got an audience, and I'd better make my performance good," he said lightly. It became their routine, small conversations that somehow meant everything. Sometimes they spoke 4 hours through that thin wall, sharing fears, dreams, and pieces of themselves they hadn't shared in years. The wall became their strange form of comfort, a safe distance where they could be honest without being exposed. But slowly that distance started to feel unnecessary. One evening, Liam said quietly. I was thinking about taking a role again. Evelyn smiled, feeling a surge of pride. That's great. Liam, you should. I'm terrified, he admitted. It's a story about loss, about starting over. I wasn't sure I could do it. You can, she said simply, because you've lived it. There was a pause on the other side, and then he said, You always know what to say. Only because I've had practice listening, she replied softly. That night, she didn't hear him rehearsing. Instead, she heard music again, a piano piece. She'd never heard before, gentle and hopeful. It played for a few minutes before fading into silence. Then, after a long moment, he spoke again. Evelyn, he said quietly, voice steady, but uncertain. I think I need to see you. Not through this wall. Not like this. Her heart stopped for a second. She stared at the wall, her fingers steepening around her pen. For weeks, this wall had been their bridge, their safety, but now he wanted to step across it. She took a deep breath and said, Okay. When she said it, she realized it wasn't just him who was ready. She was too. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed every moment. The first voice she'd heard, the sadness that connected them, the comfort they'd built without ever really being together. She wondered what it would be like to finally face him, not as the stranger behind the wall, but as the man who had slowly walked into her heart. The rain had stopped outside, leaving the city quiet. Evelyn sat by her window, staring at the faint glow of his apartment next door. It felt like looking at a different world, one she was about to step into. And though her heart raced with uncertainty, one thing was clear. Sometimes the wall that keeps you apart isn't made of bricks or distance. It's made of fear. And maybe the bravest thing a person can do is to take one small step forward and see what waits on the other side. The next evening came quietly, the way all important moments do. Evelyn stood in front of Liam's door, her heart pounding faster than she wanted to admit. She told herself she was just going to return the book. He'd lent her a small reason, a harmless excuse. But deep down, she knew this was different. This was the night she would finally step inside when he opened the door. She saw the surprise flicker in his eyes before a warm smile spread across his face. You actually came, he said softly, stepping aside. Of course, she replied, trying to sound calm, though her hands trembled slightly. His apartment looked almost like hers, small, cozy, but full of stories. The first thing she noticed were the paintings leaning against the wall. Some were finished, others half done, all filled with emotion. You paint, she asked, walking closer to one that showed a sunrise over an empty beach. Sometimes, he said. It helps when words aren't enough. Evelyn nodded, Heary's tracing the soft brush strokes. His place felt like him, gentle, a little messy, full of quiet meaning. They sat down, and for a few minutes, neither spoke. It was an awkward silence, just a heavy one, the kind that comes before something important. Finally, Liam broke it. I almost didn't ask you to come. Why, she asked. Because I wasn't sure I was ready to let someone in again, he said. But then I realized you were already there. You've been there since the first night you heard meth through that wall. Evelyn's heart ached. You weren't the only one talking, she admitted. Some nights I wanted to say something back, but I didn't want to make it worse. He smiled faintly. You didn't. You made it better. You made me feel like maybe I wasn't completely lost. The way he said it, soft, sincere, made something inside her melt. 4 months, both of them had been hiding behind walls, literal and emotional, now sitting across from each other. It felt like they'd both finally decided to stop. Liam stood up and walked toward one of the canvases. This one, he said, pointing to a painting of 2 figures separated by a thin line. I made after the first time I heard your voice. Evelyn blinked in surprise. You heard me? He nodded. You were on the phone with someone. You said, I think people come into our lives when we need them most. That stuck with me. She smiled, touched by the memory she hadn't even realized mattered. I guess I believe that more now than ever. They both laughed softly. But behind that laugh was something deeper, a quiet understanding that this connection wasn't random. It was something rare, something that had grown slowly and naturally without either of them meaning to. As they talked, time slipped by easily. They shared stories about their pasts, the small joys, the losses, the moments that shaped them. Liam spoke about Anna, not with the same pain as before, but with a calm acceptance. I'll always miss her, he said. But I think I was holding on to the wrong thing. I wasn't keeping her memory alive. I was keeping myself stuck. Evelyn nodded. Sometimes love doesn't end when someone's gone. It just changes. It becomes something you carry. He looked at her then. Really? Look, the kind of look that makes everything else fade. You've helped me remember that I can still feel without it hurting. Her heart fluttered. Maybe that's what we're both doing, remembering how to feel. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The air between them was heavy with something new. Not grief, not loneliness, but quiet possibility. Liam walked to the small table by the window and poured them both tea. You know, he said, handing her a cup, I used to think walls kept people safe. Now I think they just make us lonely, Evelyn smiled gently. Maybe it depends on what's on the other side. Key chuckled. In that case, I'm glad you were. They talked late into the evening, their voices blending with the soft sound of rain outside. Every now and then she caught him looking at her like he still couldn't believe she was real. And she felt the same, that something so simple could feel this right. When the clock struck midnight, Evelyn realized how late it was. I should probably go, she said, setting down her cup. Liam nodded, though there was hesitation in his eyes. Thank you for coming over, she smiled. Thank you for inviting me. As she walked toward the door, he said quietly, Evelyn. She turned. He looked uncertain, almost shy. You don't have to stop talking through the wall, you know. But I'd rather see you like this. She felt a warmth spread through her chest. Then maybe next time you can come to my side. He smiled, a real smile, not the tired one she'd first seen. I'd like that. Evelyn stepped out into the hallway, her heart full. The air smelled of rain and coffee. And as she closed his door behind her, she felt like something inside her had changed. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone in the world. That night, lying in bed, she stared at the wall between them. It looked the same as always, plain white, unremarkable. But oh her, it wasn't just a wall anymore. It was a witness to everything that had happened. The words, the pain, the laughter, the healing. She reached out and touched the wall gently, whispering, Good night, Liam. A moment later, his voice came through soft and calm. Good night, Evelyn. It was a simple exchange, but it meant everything. Over the next weeks, things began to shift naturally. They spent more time together, cooking, talking, taking walks by the river. Liam started rehearsing again, this time with confidence. Evelyn began writing stories that felt alive again, stories inspired by connection and courage. Their lives began to blend in quiet, beautiful ways. There were no grand confessions or dramatic moments, just steady warmth, kind that grows when two people truly see each other. And though their story had started through a thin wall, it had become something stronger, something that no wall could ever separate again. One evening, months later, Evelyn came home to find a small canvas leaning against her door. It was a painting of two apartments with light shining from both windows and a single line between them slowly fading into nothing. On the back, Liam had written just one sentence. Some walls were never meant to stay. She smiled, her heart full. Evelyn hung the painting on her wall, right where she used to press her hand when listening to his voice. The space that once held silence now held color, warmth, and a reminder of how love can find its way through even the smallest cracks. Sometimes healing doesn't come with loud promises or perfect endings. Sometimes it begins with something as simple as a voice through a thin wall and ends when you finally step inside.